think the jack of all trades role is probably going to start to go away. I
Yeah.
think there's more analysts now. There's more good quality analysts. We were beaming 4 camera angles from Qatar, bouncing them, I think that's through Frankfurt, into people's homes in the UK. So players on the ball for about a minute 49 per game.
Wow.
So if you actually really want to understand a player's performance, you can't just look at when they're interacting with the ball. And that team consisted of data engineers, data scientists, data analysts, performance analysts. These metrics were used live during the game. So we took a live event data feed, a live tracking data feed. The clever guys of our data scientists, data engineers basically created new metrics. This was the 23rd of December.
Yeah.
Called, and on the 24th of December, I was on a plane to Australia.
Hello and welcome back to my channel, and today's guest is Chris Loxston. So Chris is originally from the UK, but as you will tell from the conversation, he has spent a lot of time overseas working for various different clubs and organisations, and he actually joins for today's video from the USA. So over the past several years, Chris has been working with FIFA, so he's actually headed up a really interesting department there, kind of overseeing football development and analysis, and has been instrumental in developing what is known as the FIFA Football Language, which we'll get into in the video. So there's loads of cool insights in this. So, I found this one really, really interesting myself. So Chris shares all about the different ways of collecting data that was kind of going on during his time at FIFA, what it was like working with Arsène Wenger, and basically just shares loads of cool stories. So, I was really, really grateful for Chris's time. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, so I hope you do too. So without further ado, let's get into the chat with Chris Loxston. Chris, welcome to the channel. How are you doing today?
Very well, thanks, Chris. Yourself?
Yeah, I'm very good. I'm very good. Really looking forward to this one. So we've got lots to talk about. I tried to kind of condense it down into a manageable video size because I probably could talk to you for a long time with all the questions I've got. So I did a little intro, Chris, but for those that don't know who you are, just to kind of give a little bit of background, who you are, what you're currently doing, and probably what you kind of did a little bit in terms of FIFA, and then we'll delve into that in a lot more detail later on.
Yeah, so my name's Chris Loxston. I'm currently working with San Diego Wave, which is a professional team in the women's soccer league in America. We have to call it soccer in America. Yeah, look, my background, I've worked with multiple sports at the start of my career, then moved to football, working in the Middle East. Then I got a role at FIFA where I was for the last 5 years. And then, yeah, about 4 or 5 months ago, moved out to America for this role, which is probably a blended analysis and coaching role.
Yeah, so you told me before we started recording there, you're currently on an away day, so you currently had a lot of flying recently. So yeah, I'm sure that comes with the job, really, doesn't it? In terms of, especially in America, with the big distances you have to travel. So looking back at your LinkedIn profile, actually, Chris, you've got some experience of different sports on there. So I can see rugby, I can see cricket. Obviously, you've kind of forged a very, very successful career in football. So what I'm curious to know is where that came from. Were you always football, or has it kind of evolved over time and you've kind of gone with that?
Yeah, so I actually grew up playing table tennis. That was my main sport.
Yeah.
And at 16, I got a scholarship to go to a national academy at the time. But at 18, realized I was never going to be good enough to make a professional career out of it. So then it was a case of, well, I wanted to stay working in sport. So what industry, what career could I have to actually help me stay within sport? So I went to university, I did a BSc in sports science. And in my very first week there, I can remember we had a physiologist called Stephen Gatland from the EIS came in, and he basically had this slide on the screen saying 99.9%. And he went on to sort of say, well, 99.9% of you will never work in elite sport because the number of jobs available compared to people trying to get a job was quite small. So he said, look, to be that 0.1%, you need to go and get internships, you need to get experience, you need to study, you need to work hard. And I suppose that's where then going out to try and find these different sports started, because competitive person that I am, I'm looking around this room and say, well, I want to be that person, or that, one of those 0.1%, let's say. So yeah, I worked with Durham County Cricket Club as a strength and conditioning, or with their strength and conditioning coach. I got then in with the analysis there, coding cricket matches. And then during my degree, I got an internship with the EIS. And there I was working with Jonathan Edwards, coach on triple jump. I was working with a guy called Duncan French, who's now at UFC. as vice president of performance there. So I'd learning about strength conditioning and physical performance. And yeah, I think from there, I've just tried to get as much experience in any different sport as possible. So it wasn't that I was necessarily targeting certain sports.
Yeah.
I actually just got, into as many things as
Yeah, yeah.
possible.
Yeah, keen to just try new things. Obviously, the skills you probably learned then is kind of set you in the right frame of kind of where you've gone with, really. So I'm gonna you've got loads of experience on your LinkedIn, so we're not going to go into every single thing, Chris. So we kind of dodged upon. You said you've got some cricket on there, you've done some rugby stuff, and then national team analyst a little bit for the Saudi Arabian national team. That was for a tournament, was it the Asia Cup?
Yeah, so I moved. I lost my job. I got made part redundant when UK Sport changed the funding model prior to the London Olympics in 2012. So this was 2010.
Yeah.
And then I was really fortunate to get offered a position with Al Ahly football team in Dubai. So I took that very, very blind about what that looked like. But ultimately, I didn't have a job at the time. So I sort of packed my bags and got on a flight. And yeah, so I suppose I stayed in that domestic. They played in the domestic league in the United Arab Emirates. So I was there for 7.5 years. But during that time, the coach that was the domestic team coach at the time was offered to go and work with Saudi Arabian national team for the Asian Cup in 2015 in Australia. So yeah, I think this is probably a lesson for many budding analysts as well. This was the 23rd of December.
Yeah.
Called, and on the 24th of December, I was on a plane to Australia, leaving my girlfriend at the time. I don't think we were married then. No, we weren't. Yeah,
she was chuffed with that, was.
Yeah, exactly. And then so I think that's just part of it, and everybody says that, but you do miss certain things in this industry. But yeah, so jumped on a plane and had a terrible tournament in Australia. We got knocked out in the group stage, but great experience. I think going to an international tournament like that is it's different. It's very different, and the travel around Australia as well, and just the compactness of what you have to do in a short space of time is quite unique.
Yeah. So, I mean, we'll definitely get onto data a little bit more when we speak about the FIFA things. But in terms of just in general, Chris, have you always been that kind of data-minded person? Is that something that you've always some people are, aren't they? Or is it something that you've just learned to kind of pick up over time again with other skills?
Yeah, probably more learned, I would say. I think I'm quite a visual person, so I think video has always been sort of my number one tool.
Yeah.
And also because coaches can see video, and if you're trying to make a point and you've seen something, if you play that clip, it's so easy for them to then see the same thing. I think where data starts to come in is that, and this is probably why I did FIFA what I did, is it has to really make sense and have context. And I think in the early days, it probably didn't. Hence why it's been a bit of a slow burner. But I think we're getting to the point now where, data actually starts to make sense with coaches and with players. So I think that's a sort of evolution that we've sort of been through over the last 10 to 15 years.
Yeah. And on that kind of revolution, because you said earlier, like your current role, again, we'll speak about that in terms of is a bit of a, would you say, a hybrid between a coaching role and an analyst role? So are you seeing that as kind of a progression of the analyst position is becoming more like coaching? There's more of a coaching aspect to it. So I mean, I think you're doing your you're a qualified coach as well, aren't you, Chris?
Yeah, so I have my UEFA B, and I'm literally waiting to hear back if I pass my UEFA A now. So
good luck with that one. So
look, I think as the role in general, I've said this many times now. I think the jack of all trades role is probably going to start to go away. I think there's more analysts now. There's more good quality analysts. I think clubs are realizing the value of having analysis within their structure and processes. I think 5-10 years ago you might have had one person that had to try and do everything, but probably did nothing really well because you were spread so thinly. I think you're probably going to see a divide now where you have more data specialists.
Yeah.
And then you're going to see probably more of that coaching analyst, because I suppose the role of that coaching analyst or an analyst in general is you're trying to provide insights to coaches so they can plan training in a certain way, set up your game plan in a certain way. And I think if you don't know football well enough to be able to talk to them about that specific element, I think that's where the value gets lost. So I sort of see, and it's going to take time, but I sort of see that person that can do a little bit of everything. I don't think you're going to be able to add the same value anymore as either that person that's specialized in data that can bring a different lens, a different element, or that person that can relate to a coach and say, well, I've seen this is how I think they're going to play. And therefore, we need to probably look at working on this week in training and going into the game. This is how we should set up. So I think I certainly couldn't have done that when I first started as an analyst. I think that's why I've trended in this direction as well, because I suppose I can now get on the grass and make a little bit more of an impact, or at least be able to work with our head coach and coaching staff as well.
Yes.
It brings my analysis background in, but allows me to sort of relate to the coaching staff and actually now work with players on, what we need to prepare going into the next game.
Yeah, definitely. So on that role that you had with Al Ahly, so was that kind of in terms of, because you've got in your profile that you're obviously managing kind of other analysts and sports scientists, was that because your role at FIFA, obviously you're overseeing a lot of analysts, which again we'll come to. So was that kind of one of the first roles you had where you were kind of managing or like kind of overseeing other staff, or and how did you kind of take to that in the first instance?
Yeah, it was. We it's quite funny. Almost every role I've had to set things up from the start. I've not really inherited a role where there's other things already in place. So yeah, we brought in 2 interns. We paid them, of course. But I suppose we took two guys that have come fresh out of university. They helped with analysis. They helped with managing the GPS data and everything like that. So that was the first time I probably had to sort of manage people. And I think that's a skill as well. And I think you learn and develop that. And it's something you probably don't really get taught ever. You just have to find your own way. I think all I've ever done is every manager I've ever had, whether that's a football manager or more in an organization, I've always just thought, if they've done something that made me feel really good, I've taken a note of that and said, okay, that's a really, really good way of doing it. If they've done something that's made me feel really bad, I've taken a note and said, well, that's maybe not how I want to do things when I'm in that position. So that's sort of how I've learned to do the managerial piece over the time.
Yeah, cool. So then after the Al Ahly position, obviously, this is when you start out at FIFA. So firstly, how did that come about? Because obviously FIFA is like kind of the such a great kind of organization to work for. So the first, obviously, you didn't go in as the same role that you ended up with, did you? So what did you kind of go in as, and how did that come about, Chris?
Yeah, I just applied. I applied like you would for a regular job. Went through an interview process and got offered the position. And I was at a position in Al Ahly where the chairman had changed, and I think it was coming to the end of my time there. And I felt that, so I thought, right, it's probably time that we need to make a bit of a move. Got offered that position. Went in as an analyst. They'd never really had any analyst in house before. They'd always used third party providers or brought in people as consultants for the World Cup, for example. So I did, I think, 2.5 years in that role, which was important to actually learn what FIFA is all about. It's a huge organization. It's very, very different in the way that they don't have a team, right? So you're not necessarily working to help a team win on the weekend. You're actually working to try and develop the game of football as a whole. So that takes time to sort of, I suppose, learn how you can do that, because it's very different from preparing an opposition analysis. So I was traveling all around the world, going to everything from the Men's World Cup, which was my first tournament in Russia, through to under-17 boys and girls tournaments, which again is a very different level. And you have to, I suppose, approach your analysis and your observations in a slightly different way. But I've been very fortunate there to work with some really world leaders. And in the same way I spoke about learning to be a manager, there I've learned how to look at football in various different ways just through the people I've been sat in a room listening to, basically.
So that is based in, is it Zurich, the office? Were you based there for, that's what, okay, cool. So, and you said, like, before you kind of joined, really do? So were you going in as the department almost, or what did it look like when you went in, like kind of analysis wise?
Yeah, so I joined the sort of coaching development department. What they'd always done is sent a group of technical experts, so former players, former or
Yeah,
current or former coaches to tournaments,
yeah,
and they would write what we would call a technical study group report.
yeah,
It was very observation led, so huge value. Don't get me wrong, huge value in it, but it was, I suppose, as coaching is, people's opinions on the trends of that tournament and what happened in that tournament.
yeah,
I suppose where my role was, or why I was hired, is to actually start to bring some objectivity to some of those observations. So they had used data previously, but it was very simple and basic data, for example. But I suppose where my role was, why I was hired, was to try and bring some objectivity
yeah.
um, to that observations and to that technical report.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So on your profile, Chris, under the first initial role that you had with FIFA, it says you mentioned the technical study group, current and ex pros and things like that. So then you created the technical analysis reports for kind of competitions. So is that something that you do after each competition? You would produce a report. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, exactly that. So I mean, they've done this since 1966, so this is something I necessarily created, but
Yeah.
it's something we started to develop. So yeah, it would take us probably 2 to 3 months to create that report, but we'd have data within there, we'd have team profiles, or would have physical data in there, and then
Yeah.
what we'd have is a group of technical experts that would be given I suppose, the interpretation of what they've seen, what some of this data is meaning, and hopefully with some sort of takeaway messages of, okay, the current under 20 men's World Cup is being played like this. Here's the trends that we're seeing.
Yeah. 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 And is that just internally? Is that just shared internally, or who
No,
is that public?
no, that's if you go on the FIFA Training Centre,
It's all
you
on
can
there.
you can read all of that. And I suppose how we evolved and developed that is certainly like in the men's World Cup that's just passed. We no longer produce a book, let's say a PDF that you can download.
Yeah.
It's all bite-sized articles on certain topics that will just continue to come out now, because obviously we have a completely different way of looking at it and a completely different data set to sort of, I suppose, get insights from.
Yeah. So that you mentioned the reports were done from 66, but in terms of like the current data set now, have you gone back and coded all previous tournaments? Is that something you've done or you look to do?
Yeah, so we went back to 2010. So
Right.
ultimately, to do what we needed to do, you have to be able to see all players on the pitch. And
Mm.
then FIFA actually only has tactical footage since 2010
Okay. Yeah.
archived. So it was very difficult to go back prior to that, because you can't see the players. So
Yeah.
the way we were actually collecting data is having one analyst watch one player for the whole game.
Yeah.
Because you need to be able to see more than just what they do with the ball at the feet. So
Yeah.
yeah, I suppose we've been able to go back to 2010, but not much more. And on the women's game, we have some footage from 2015, but the majority is we have very good tracking data and we have very good tactical camera from 2019. So with the Women's World Cup coming up this summer, the guys there will definitely be able to do some good analysis looking back
Yeah.
from 2019 through to 2023.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so then so that was kind of according to your profile here, so kind of 2.5 years ish in terms of that analyst position, and then you've obviously stepped up as group leader, football performance analysis and insight. So what did that step up look like, and was that kind of, I suppose it was kind of linked to the upcoming World Cup, wasn't it? So like how did that look, and what changed in your role, Chris?
Yeah, so Arsène Wenger joined as our chief of global development, and he came in with a vision and a plan. We presented what we'd done to him previously,
Yeah,
um, and he said that's fantastic. I'd also like to do this and
yeah,
take it to the next level. And therefore, we had no choice really but to start building out a team, because it was still only myself at that moment in time. We'd brought in a few consultants to support me around some of the bigger tournaments, but yeah, what he was thinking to try and do, I definitely couldn't have done on my own. So I suppose over the last 2.5, maybe 3 years before moving on, I'd started to build. It wasn't actually a physical department, but a team, let's say.
yeah,
And that team consisted of data engineers, data scientists, data analysts, performance analysts. So, and then we called our sort of coders as well football analysts. So
Yeah.
because what we're actually asking them to do wasn't data collection, we're asking them to interpret certain elements in the game as well. So yeah, I think data collector wouldn't have been an appropriate title for them. I think they've got a lot more in their locker than that. Yeah, and we built this department up, and I suppose we had two remits really. One was to try and investigate the modern trends of the game in a more detailed and I suppose strategic approach, which is why we built the FIFA Football Language. And the second element was, how can we improve the fan experience? So I'm not sure what you saw in the UK during the World Cup, but I know around the world, basically we had a series of what we call enhanced football intelligence metrics. And these metrics were used live during the game. So we took a live event data feed, a live tracking data feed. The clever guys of our data scientists, data engineers basically created new metrics with that could run live during games. And they were used by TV broadcasters, lower third graphics, halftime graphics, and then also on all FIFA platforms. So they were visible there as well. So yeah, credit to everybody that worked on that, because I can tell you there was a lot of hours put into to make sure that was delivered.
Yeah, because I had a note of that anyway, because it was the kind of the augmented reality kind of thing where the fans could hold the phone up and you could see all the stats, which was really, really cool. So, but yeah, no, that's really interesting. And in terms of just a question on, because before you joined, Chris, I was watching another video of you where you were kind of having another interview and you described Arsène Wenger as almost like a professor. Is that kind of how he kind of his goals and what he wanted to achieve in the department? So what, can you just go a little bit more into kind of what it was like working with him and kind of how he kind of what his plan was basically?
Yeah, unbelievably nice guy to start with. I suppose I think his unique ability, in my opinion, is to take something very, very complex and within one sentence make it very simple. I have no what's the word I'm looking for? Yeah, there's a reason he was so good at what he did. And I will say that probably plays a very large part in what he did. He has a very, very clear vision in everything he does, and he just makes, like I said, he makes it understandable to many people with real clarity. So yeah, I mean, like I said, the opportunity to work with him is has developed myself personally, professionally, in every way, because he's just he's a person that will sit and speak to you as well. You know, he's not somebody that shies away in office. He'll actively try and help you develop as a person as well. So yeah, I have a lot of gratitude for the time being able to work with him.
Definitely miss him from the Premier League management days. He was always a good one to watch. So you build out this team then, Chris. So how big is this team? You mentioned performance analysts, data scientists, data analysts. How big is this? And is everyone based on site? Is it remote working? Because I do remember a time when a lot of the hiring was happening, and a lot of my, when you get notifications on LinkedIn of your connections getting new jobs, there was loads of people getting these jobs as analysts with FIFA. So the team was big, I presume. So how big was that, and how did that work for you?
Yeah, I mean, at the height of the Men's World Cup, it was probably in excess of 100 people. And again, just because the way we wanted to collect data, we needed that number of people. The sort of core employee group was about 3. So we had a lot of consultants. It's just the way FIFA works. And I think it was probably one of the main things coming out of a pandemic is people can work from home. So we had our first tournament, which was in the middle of the pandemic still. Once things started to open up a little bit, was actually coded through people working from home. So we were in Qatar for a Club World Cup. I think it's the one Liverpool was playing in, and we were beaming 4 camera angles from Qatar, bouncing them, I think, through Frankfurt into people's homes in the UK. The team was out there collecting the data, and then that data was streamed all the way back to Qatar. So yeah, I think that was a unique opening, let's say. And I think we took that with both hands, and it allowed this team to be created, because you're never moving 100 people to Switzerland. So it was a case of, right, how do we do this? How do we make the most of this new world that we're now living in? And I think it's allowed, a lot of people to get jobs and actually to learn the next part from their university careers.
Yeah.
And get good experience in that way. And I'm sure they'll move on at some stage, or some of them will, into teams and clubs, and obviously start to spread what they've learned with FIFA and take that with them. And then obviously that leaves spaces for the next set of graduates to come through and fill those roles. So I think it got big during tournaments, and obviously we shrank it down when we were out of tournaments.
Yeah. So then you mentioned the coding's all done on a kind of individual player basis. So I'm presuming, let's say I'm one of the analysts, am I just given one player and that's all I'm coding for that game? And kind of, and you mentioned as well, like kind of off the ball actions, which will kind of come to with the football language and stuff like that. But how does that look for the analysts? How are they? Because I'm presuming for a lot of them, it would be somewhat different to what they're used to. So that kind of training and onboarding to make everything consistent and standardized. How does that kind of look?
Yeah, so ultimately we realized that, well, we did the data analysis on it. So a player's on the ball for about 1:49 per game.
Wow.
So if you actually really want to understand a player's performance, you can't just look at when they're interacting with the ball. So they got given a player and they sat and they watched that one player. I always joke, but there's half truth in every joke, I suppose, that if they don't know the score at the end of the game, they've probably done a good job, because they don't want to watch the game, is to watch that player. And then we combine all of the data from all the individual players, and that's how you start to get the team metrics through. And then the biggest challenge was, exactly, you alluded to it, was how do you get 22 people to code in the same way, right? To see the same events. A pass is an easy one, right? But we're talking about, did a player make an offer to receive in behind the opposition defensive line? That's a little bit different. So we had some really good people join that had done this before. They created gold standard codes, so we'd get the whole team to code the same player. We had a gold standard of that coding. And then our data scientist guys have built out sort of reliability checkers, so we could run each analyst's coding against the gold standard. And a little bit like you have IDPs, individual development plans, with players, we'd have a similar thing with each analyst, because we'd understand, okay, they're really good at this element, but they don't see this element very well. So actually we could show them where they're going wrong in those elements. And again, there was a lot of time invested in that, because we wanted to have the deepest data set in the world, but also the most accurate and reliable. And I think by the time we got to the World Cup, that's exactly where we were.
Yeah, that's really interesting in terms of the testing and feeding back on kind of areas to improve. So one thing you did say there, Chris, was like obviously off the ball actions, and one of them being kind of offering for the ball. So can you just explain how do you define offering for the ball? How is that kind of defined for the analyst?
Yeah, so, and this is where we built the FIFA Football Language, because we needed to have real clarity over what each event was. And it's funny, I was thinking about this because I knew we were going to be doing this interview, but even in my role now, like, talk about coaches have game models, you talk about, how you use data in clubs, like, clarity over what you're talking about is so important. Right. So give you an example: possession. When does possession start? When does possession finish? What if I'm playing the ball and somebody gets a block when the ball comes back to me? Am I still in possession? Is that a new possession? Is it the same possession? I think there's not necessarily a right or wrong answer to it, but what you need to know as a coaching staff and as an organization is, this is how we are defining X. So even when people are building out game models, for me, definitions of what your language actually is are probably where you should be starting. But yeah, the football language was exactly that. It was we defined how we were going to break the game of football down. It's available free to the public. It was never intended to be private. So we actually wanted to put that out there so that analysts, coaches, whoever was interested could go and have a look and see. And like I said, it's not necessarily the right way, but it's the way FIFA want to go about it. So it was just a stance to say, this is how we're going to look at the game. And if you want to see how we're looking at the game, you can go here and you can see it. So like an offer to receive is one of three things. It's either a hand signal, so a player physically either their arm in the air or arms in front asking for the ball. It's a change in body shape, so they're turning to then face the ball to create a passing option, or it's a movement. So the in behind movement of a nine running between a centre back and a full back to try and create an option to receive the ball. So like I said, you can go on the FIFA training center, you can see each of these elements with video, with text. And there's even now an e-learning module, an introduction to the football language you can go for free as well. So
nice.
I think that took us probably 2.5 years because you think you're there, and then you watch the game. After 40 games, something unique will happen and you have to go back and slightly readjust. So that's why the game's so fun, I suppose.
Definitely, I'll for sure link the learning center below the video when this is out, Chris. So so that offering for the ball, then I'm presuming, I think I've heard you say this before, in terms of that is then further classified as whether it's offering for the ball in behind the defense or offering. Is that right? So it's kind of, there's different categories to things like that.
So we try to have everything in relation to the opposition. So I suppose a pass is a pass, but if a pass is breaking the defensive line, it's a different type of pass, right? So I think knowing, and this is where tracking data starts to come in, knowing where the opposition are, where they're stood. If a team are playing a back three, a back four, a back five, it makes a through ball behind the defensive line very different. So we try to always put everything in relation to the opposition. We created a line detection algorithm, which basically automated lines and units. With formations, we know formations are very fluid. What you see on Sky Sports before a team kicks off, you very rarely see on the field unless they're in an organised mid-block, So that line detection algorithm would change every frame, every time the ball moves as well, to be realistic to how the players are stood on the field at that moment in time.
Yeah, cool. And then, so how these new kind of metrics and things that you're looking at, how do you decide upon them? How do you think this needs to be added to the language? Is that a group decision? Is that like, how does that kind of come about, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, we created a performance analysis working group in FIFA, which had representatives from some of the leading member associations around the world. We obviously had Arsène Wenger, which helps having somebody like that. But yeah, we spoke to many coaches, analysts, performance staff as well, just to try and, figure out what they wanted to look at in the game. And that's why I said it took, 2.5 years to really get it to where it is. It's actually just trying to bring all of that together. Some things, we sort of said, I don't think we can do that and collect it accurately. So there's a list of what we'd love to have in there as well. We got it to a point where we know this is a series of data points that we can collect, and we can collect them accurately and reliably.
Yeah. So then, I mean, I'm presuming this is a huge kind of data set. So the whole data, like who is getting access to this? Are you delivering these to the federation, like the different federations, the different countries and stuff? Like who, if it's not public, the whole thing is not public in terms of all the data, or is it? I don't.
The data, no. Any team that participates in a World Cup, whether that's a junior or senior, they have access to this. Outputs of the data go on to platforms like FIFA Plus, the training center. There's a match report that's available on the FIFA training center, which has the outputs of all of the data collected, which is free. Again, I think that was available as well during the World Cup, and that was used by the world's media, anybody that wanted to look at it. So all of the outputs are available. Just the data set itself, with some of the data protection policies, that's a little bit of a hurdle to try and make that data set completely free for everybody.
Yeah, sure. So then, in terms of what does it look like during the actual tournament? Because I'm obviously presuming these teams are bringing their own analysts in stadium and stuff. Or do you have your own guys there? And how did that kind of work for a World Cup game, really?
Yeah, so we had a team based in the UK. So they were based in Newport in Wales, who were collecting all of the data. We then had a team in what's called the IBC, which is the International Broadcast Compound. So they were running the live EFI metrics, so the new metrics that we had on the screens and in the graphics and at halftime. And then we also had a team of performance analysts and technical experts going to the stadiums, watching the games, tagging certain elements throughout that games, having discussions. And then we had content writers with us as well. We had operations staff to try and make everything work. Yeah, I mean it's a huge organization, to try and bring this together. Yeah, and I think a lot of the analysis is available now on the training center as well. So there's some really good stuff there, because it's probably the first time to that level we've been able to bring technical observations and data analytics together, to provide some really fascinating insights from that tournament.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, just as a general, how was the tournament for you, Chris? When the games were on, did you have downtime at that point, or were you busy working at that time during the games?
Yeah, it was a condensed and compact World Cup. It was a blessing and a curse at the same time. We typically were going to 2 games a day. Every day. So it's a World Cup. You don't want downtime at a World Cup. I think it's a unique opportunity, and I've always been extremely grateful to be able to go to those games and sit and watch a World Cup final. I mean it's like I said, happens once every 4 years. You can rest and recuperate after the tournament's finished, but the opportunity to go and watch the best of the best at a World Cup in fantastic stadiums in a fantastic place was a unique opportunity.
Yeah, sure. Now, I'm not going to ask you to kind of share secrets or anything, Chris, but in terms of obviously this kind of language, I'm sure it's something that you envisage to kind of grow and kind of develop over time as kind of more things come to the forefront and technology improves. So are you able to kind of share some ideas where you see that might maybe go in the future in terms of additional things that aren't being recorded now that potentially you would like to see?
I think the first thing that the team will do, obviously I'm not there anymore, so I can't speak too much on their behalf. I just advise that group now. But they'll definitely look to now start to try and automate some of the collection. I'm a big believer that there's certain elements that machine learning AI will never be able to really get. You're talking about, did a player mean to do this or not? And that's where I think our football analysts are critical. But if we can offload some of the more basic elements from them and allow them to focus really on that more subjective element of coding, I think that's probably where they're going to look to take it. And I think trying to blend the physical and the technical tactical data together, that's probably the next step. So understanding why players make certain movements, whether they were made at the right times or not. I think there's probably a good piece of work to be done there as well. So I can't really speak too much on where they're going to take it now, but there's some very clever people there that have done a lot of really good stuff. So I'm excited to see where they want to take it as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, what you've said there in terms of like the potentially machine learning taking some of the burden and kind of freeing up, it comes back to that point that we made about analysts' role changing over time and whether it be more of a coaching role or more of a pure data thing. So that kind of leads on nicely to your kind of current role. You mentioned you're kind of advising that FIFA still, but you're currently now you mentioned San Diego Wave. So again, how did that come about, Chris? And it's kind of a different role in terms of more of a coaching role, you've said. So is that a conscious decision that you made?
Yeah, and I'd some people thought it was a bit of a career change going from analysis to coaching. I'd say it's a bit of a progression because I'm taking everything that I've ever done and now applying that more to actually coaching. So it was a job I applied for and went through a pretty thorough interview process as well, and then got offered it. And I think just made the decision that it was a time for me to try something new, to challenge myself, put myself massively at the start of this job, massively outside of my comfort zone. It's not something I'd done a lot of previously. I had coached a little bit throughout my career, but not to this extent. Challenged myself a little bit. Can I do something different? Can I do something new? Again, working in women's soccer. I have to say soccer now in America, but women's football, which is going in one direction at the moment. I think this Women's World Cup this summer will also show where the women's game has gone. So completely different role. Like I said, a progression from what I was doing before, because I still apply a lot of the principles that I've developed over the last years into this role. And it's really nice to be able to, I suppose, be part of the team, coaching the players in terms of how we're going to play the next game, putting that game plan together, and actually being able to go out onto the grass and, I suppose, coach sessions in terms of how we want those players to play and give that specific detail, which as an analyst alone, you would never do. So yeah, it's fascinating. I'm really enjoying it.
Cool. I mean, what's the split look like, Chris, in terms of being out on the grass and being behind a laptop? Is it more now? You are on the grass a lot more now.
Yeah, I mean, for every training session, I'll be out coaching.
Yeah.
And then obviously once the players start to leave, that's where, we start to look at the opposition, or we're reviewing games that we've played or reviewing training. But I think you'll see that anyway with coaches in general now.
Yeah.
Like, quite a few coaches now are, using technology, using laptops, looking at game film, looking at training film. And I think that's what I like about this organization as well. Is, I mean, our head coach is phenomenal. A level of technical detail is unbelievable. And I'm learning again, and I've worked with some phenomenal coaches previously, and this again is challenging me, and I'm learning. So I think I've always tried to make sure I'm progressing as a person and learning and developing, and this is definitely a role that's helping me do that.
Perfect. So, I mean, you've obviously the kind of roles that we've said, you've done a lot of traveling with your job. So, what's some of the best places you've been to, Chris? Where you, and how does that compare to where you currently are now?
Yeah. I've been very lucky. I've been to some interesting countries. Certainly when we were playing Asian Champions League, we played a game in Tehran, in Iran.
Really?
In a stadium there with 90,000 people, which was interesting. I suppose probably one of the best places recently is Costa Rica. There was an under-20 Women's World Cup in my last role.
Yeah.
The sad thing is, I suppose, is I've been to a lot of places, but not really explored too much.
Yeah.
What you see going from the airports to the hotels to the stadiums, and sometimes you'll have a little off day where you can go and try and do a little bit, but it's not like you're on holiday going going to do all the tourist stuff. So and this role here is quite interesting. I've been to America a few times previously, but we're really flying around the whole country now playing games. And if it's getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning to run to see the White House when you're in Washington DC, that's sort of what I try and do now. And if I can steal an hour just to go and see a little thing, then I'll do that.
Cool. And what would you say? I'm sure there's still a lot to come, Chris. But what's the kind of highlight so far of your career?
Yeah. I think what we delivered at the World Cup most recently, I think that was, I think being able to lead a team of that size to deliver something that's probably not really been done before to that level. And I think that the most pleasing part was to see, the people develop and grow in that period as well. I'm quite proud of what we did there. And I think hopefully that's laid a foundation for analysis in general, just to continue to develop, and hopefully it's made people around the world think about it in a different way. And I think that's probably don't get me wrong, I've won leagues and things and cups with teams I've worked with previously, but I think knowing what went into that project and being delivered in the way it was, I think that's probably going to be up there on that list.
Yeah, with it being kind of obviously a culmination of years working, and also with it being almost a bit like a legacy where it can, it's not just going to go away. Like it's the starting of the future. Basically, you can kind of build on that, and it will be built upon in years to come, I'm sure. So, just cautious of time, Chris. So I've got a few questions really, just in terms of people that be watching this will be potentially aspiring analysts. They'll be maybe early on in their careers. They might still be at university. So looking at someone like yourself that's had such a great career so far, is there any kind of, is there any go-to advice that you would say that you have for that particular person if they are still at uni and they're looking to forge a career in analysis?
Yeah, I think one of the things I regret in my career is, now I've come into this coaching space, is I've sat and watched hundreds of training sessions being delivered by phenomenal coaches. And I probably didn't watch in a way that I was watching. I was taking it in. So I think when you find yourself in environments or situations where, you're with an Arsène Wenger or whoever it may be, like take notes, whatever you need to do to retain that information.
Yeah.
And you will find yourself, so yeah, so once you get over the fact that it's an Arsène Wenger or Marco van Basten or whoever it may be, make sure you take that opportunity and sort of retain it. And then also just with the sport you're working in, like try and become as knowledgeable about that sport as possible. I think it's not happening as much now, but I think, just coding a game and giving it to a coach and saying, there you go, this is what I've seen, is probably not good enough. Like, need to do more than that. So try and understand the why, try and understand, okay, you've given that, and then the coach has set the team up to play like this, and this is how we've played. Like, understand why this did that, ask a lot of questions. And I think, just try and, everybody says be a sponge, but it is right. Like, you're constantly in environments surrounded by great people and great information. So try and decipher that and try and understand how that helps you develop in your career and as a person as well.
Yeah. And then more specifically then, any advice on someone that's going for an interview for an analysis job? I'm sure you've been part of interviews on the other side of the table. So anything that you can say on that, Chris?
Yeah. I've always been somebody to trust my gut quite a lot. I think just do your homework. It's very clear if somebody's come in and not really prepared. So I think understand the organization, get as much information as possible on the person that's interviewing you. Understand where they, I suppose, where they operate, and just be prepared. Ultimately, your experience is your experience. Understand what you've done and which parts of your experience will fit into that role, and talk about it, and just be normal. Like, ultimately, trust me, the first time I started interviewing people who interview are just as nervous as you being.
That's true as well.
They need to find the right person, and I think just don't try and be somebody else. Just be yourself. Sometimes you might not be the right fit, and that's just life, right? Sometimes you may dodge a bullet and not get a job that actually probably wasn't the right job for you at that time as well. So I think just do your homework and just try and prepare yourself in the best way possible, and don't apply for things that you're not ready for, because organizations have HR systems now, and I know in FIFA I could see every role that a person had applied for. And if you've applied for a job with marketing, and then all of a sudden you've applied for a job as an analyst, it doesn't show that you're dedicated to that career. So I think just be a little bit careful in terms of just casting the net and throwing your CV into everything.
Yeah, good advice. Perfect. So, bit of a personal one then, Chris. What's your kind of goals for the future? What do you see yourself 10 years? What do you want to be, a head coach of something, or any ideas?
No? I have no idea. I just roll with the punches normally. I'd love to see this organization. We're in year 2 now, so I'd love to see this organization go and win the championship. I think that'd be fantastic. It's a great organization, great group of players, great group of staff. So I'd love to see us be successful. And let's see. I don't know. I've always just gone with the flow, and if I get a feel for something, then go there. But I don't know really what the future holds.
No, that's fair enough. That's definitely fine. So obviously, I'm going to link the FIFA the training centre, that it's called, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah.
I'm going to link that down below. Is there anything else that you want to give a shout out to, Chris? Any books that you read? And it doesn't have to be sport or analysis. Any podcast books? Anything that you enjoy? You think people else will find value from?
Yeah. I just like for me, the training centre is probably the main place at the moment. I know I used to work there, so it's a big promotion. I try and listen and read everything. Like, Twitter's a great place. I think you've just got to decipher the good from the bad. I don't necessarily have one thing that I go to all the time. If I see things that I think look of value, I'll read it. So nothing specifically I would recommend.
No, that's fine. So you mentioned you're currently away at the minute for an away game. So when's the game, Chris?
Friday against Racing Louisville. We'll definitely not pronounce that properly, but we'll
well, by the time this video comes out, we'll see how you've gotten on. So that's everything, Chris. Listen, I really appreciate your time. It's fascinating to speak about the stuff that you've done at FIFA. I'm sure you'll be a success in whatever you do, to be fair. And good luck with this season. Good luck in the future. Anything you want to add before we close it off?
No, good. Just say thanks. Yeah, thanks for the chat.
Yeah, no problem. Chris, you take care, and I'll catch you soon.